Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. Talking about the Wendigo. Howdy, me again from the Skinwalker Post. This time we'll talk about the Wendigo. Wendigo is actually a spirit that lurks within the frost-covered mountains of the U.S., specifically Algonquin Territory and Great Lakes region. It is in constant search for people. These people usually fit two different demographics, either starving, desperate, poor and cold, or arrogant, selfish, greedy, and gutless. Once it has its victim, it'll possess them. Firstly, it will influence their actions, usually driving them to cannibalism. Then there's the transformation. It's important to note that the whole deer skull thing is a later addition from media and other influences that is not mentioned in mythology and legend. So if you've seen a deer skull Wendigo, you're either lying or you've seen something different, which is more worrisome. Also important to note that the Wendigo, like the Skinwalkers, are not cryptids. A cryptid is an unknown species. Wendigo is a spirit, and the physical Wendigo is basically a human, even though they look like giant corpses. The individual will lose their hair quickly. They become painfully thin to the point where their bones jut out. In some cases, their organs would spill. Their skin loses whatever life and color it had and will become either a ash gray or a sallow yellowish pale. Its hard as of ice. It becomes so hungry it'll bite on its lips until nothing but sharpened yet rotting teeth and gums show. The eyes are sunken and it grows rapidly. Anywhere from 6 to 15 foot tall, it is also stated to grow in proportion to whatever meal it ate. They're quick on their feet and have strength comparable to that of a grizzly bear. They do have their weaknesses. Fire is most famous. After all, it's the most effective with frost-bitten, giant cannibals, and as shown in the tale where a Wendigo kidnaps a boy. The Wendigo gets its legs hacked off, and its head decapitated and its corpse is burned, so it seems enough physical damage to its corporeal could kill them. But with their vast knowledge of the woods and mountainous regions, it'll more than likely be one step ahead, and with voice mimicry it'll lead you to getting lost. It's a perfect mix of savagery and cunning, the apex predator of the north, if you will. And with its ability of voice mimicry, it'll lead any unsuspecting traveler to a violent end. Second story. Northwood's cryptid encounter. I've had this story on my mind for a long time. I've always been a fan of the supernatural and cryptid scene, but never had any standout experiences myself. I've lived in the northern Midwest my whole life, and have come to appreciate the local lore that comes with. This is the story about my first real cryptid experience. It's a long one, but I hope you enjoy. In my late teens, I worked at a camp for a few summers. The camp was massive, with only about 1/5 of it being equipped for hospitality, dining hall, cabins, shower houses, etc., and the rest being wilderness. The land had 6 lakes on it, all connected by small rivers. What made this camp particularly eerie, however, was it was actually built around a Potawatomi burial ground. I won't get into the legends around the burial mounds, but overall, this place checked all the boxes for a B-list horror movie. Now, my job at camp was sort of a catch-all. I was a program director, lifeguard, cook, gift shop manager. Basically, if they needed a role filled, I was the one doing it. It kept me busy, and I had many long days. I would close the gift shop at about 7 each night, then head upstairs to the kitchen. I could walk back to my cabin if I wanted, but the cook hated the dark. Babyface crying hated the dark. So I'd help him with dishes and cutting fruit for breakfast, and then walk him to his cabin. I have one rule though. No flashlights. You can't see very well in the woods if your eyes are focused on a small beam of light. I hated the idea of people or animals sneaking up on us. So every night, in the moonlight, I would walk him to his cabin, then walk the public road to mine. My ulterior motive for taking the public road was, well, I'm a smoker, and we have to be good role models for the kids. No smoking in camp, but they can't tell you what to do on public property. My cabin was right on the edge of the hospitable portion of the land. Miles of marshlands and forests sat behind my cabin, and, fortunately or unfortunately, I had the cabin to myself. But the weird thing was that every night I would be smoking and walking the public road, and I would hear screaming in the woods. It sounded like a woman was being murdered. I brushed it off the first night. There's a public access lake. People get rowdy. Sound carries. Could be a prank, or a fox, or an owl. It's the woods. But it kept happening every night, as soon as I stepped onto that road. I decided not to let it bother me. I had to be up early every day. No sense in chasing noise in the dark. I would get to my cabin, spread some tobacco for the land, and sleep soundly every night. Well, the end of summer came around. It was always bittersweet. You eat 3 meals a day with the same people for 3 months. They start to grow on you. One goodbye tradition we kept up over the years was on the final new moon of the camp season. The ranger would take the staff for a spirit walk. It was always good fun. He'd share the legends of the land with the new staff and try to shake them up. We would hike through the back of the camp, around the marshes and lakes, and see what kind of spooky things we would stir up. We all met at the only street light on the public road that night, but that year the ranger had his rifle slung over his shoulder. We ran into a cougar the year before, and 2 wolves lived in the back property, so I didn't think much of it. The rules are simple. No flashlights. No jingling keys. No running. If you run, we might not find you. They were half to scare people, half true. The woods were thick and the marshes were dangerous. Everything was going smoothly till we reached a river crossing not too far from the public road. It takes you to a clearing, just before the trail reconnects with the road behind my cabin. The moment we crossed the bridge, the woods went dead silent. You could hear yourself breathing. That, my friends, is one of the scariest things that can happen to you in the woods. Silence. And then, just like every night before, a blood-curdling scream ripped across the clearing. One of the new staff was about to take off before myself, and another grabbed his arms. "That's the screaming I've been hearing," I told my boss. "That's the screaming I hear every night." The ranger shushed everyone. The scream came again, louder this time. The ranger whistled in the direction of the noise. It whistled back. Suddenly, the screaming surrounded us. Behind us, to the right, to the left. The group closed in, shoulder to shoulder, not daring to even breathe. The ranger, ever serious and calm, said barely over a whisper, "We're turning around. Take the bridge back to the trail. We're going the long way." So, in hurried steps, we made our way back to the street light that we met under without muttering a word. Once we were in light again, I could tell that the ranger was actually shaken up. This is the same man that was charged by a cougar in the dark and brushed it off. "I need a cigarette." "You haven't smoked in like 2 years." "I need a cigarette." I wasn't about to argue with the man holding a rifle, so I obliged. After a few drags, he muttered, "I don't want to scare anyone, but I know only one creature that can mimic human voices like that." "It's a Wendigo," I said, not even thinking. I was in shock. All summer I walked that road, and this thing was out there, screaming, trying to lure me in. That's when he said that. Yes, he thought the same. He first thought it was one of the neighboring property owners looking for their dog, calling out for them. So he whistled. Then he explained the gun. All spring, he was finding deer strewn around the property. Not unusual, being the woods and all. But there were so many and so brutally taken down. He said these things looked like they had been hit by cars. In the middle of the woods. Absolutely mangled. More bizarrely, no other animals would touch them. No tracks that said bear, or wolf, or cougar. He was worried, with something bringing big game down like that. So he brought his rifle. No one said much after that. My boss got sage from her cabin and gave everyone who asked for one a blessing. We were shaken. After that, I changed cabins. I didn't own much in general at the time, so I wasn't troubled in the least to get off the public road. Didn't even care that I had to row out in the middle of the lake to have a cigarette. I wasn't stepping foot on that road, and I'm a little sorry to say I never stepped foot back on that property. Call me superstitious or lily-livered, but I couldn't bring myself to go back into those woods. Not even if you paid me. Third story. My possible Wendigo sighting, Montrose, Colorado. Tonight I was discussing this extremely weird and terrifying experience my friend and I had when we gave someone a ride home. To give into more context of what happened and why I stated possible sighting. I live on the western slope of Colorado and I'm an avid marijuana user, especially when I'm up late with a friend working on a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. So it's really difficult for me to say it's real being under the influence. The strange thing about it is how my friend and I felt and saw. It was in late spring, and we were working on a campaign late in the evening, and we got the munchies. I know, how can we be more stereotypical? My friend only lives 4 blocks away from a gas station, and it can be accessed from side streets. Being under the influence, I did not want to take a main street or go far at all. It wasn't responsible of me, and excusing using side streets doesn't justify it. Again, I know it was irresponsible of me. But moving on, as we were leaving the convenience store, my friend was stopped by a woman he knew growing up, and she was close friends with his mother. She was extremely intoxicated and alone, so my friend offered her a ride home to make sure she got back safe. Now here's where things got really weird. Without conversing with each other, my friend and I both felt like she was not safe to walk. I played this off as being a woman in her 60s or early 70s, intoxicated and completely alone. She claimed it was only up the block away, but it was actually a few miles outside of town. It would have easily taken her over a few hours for her to get home. Being in a small town, we have no Uber, Lyft, and taxis are pretty much triple the price at this hour. So we both felt really off that she was okay to walk that far at 1:30 in the morning. When we get down the road from her place, she asked us to drop her off away from her place so that her boyfriend doesn't see our headlights. This point, I didn't want to go into anything further, and there was so many red flags about the situation, I knew it's best to just drop her off as requested and go back to my friend's house. As I reversed down this single-lane dirt road, I told my friend that I'm going to just pull over before we get back into town because I really needed to use the bathroom, and we then both agreed that she was in a very bad situation tonight. Once I turn around this bend in the road, my headlights shine into a small group of trees and bushes. I noticed this extremely large elk-like creature lowering itself from being exposed from my headlights. I could make out the face, but it wasn't normal like an elk. Large antlers, it came off like dead tree branches. The front legs were inverted, skinny, and extremely long. I could tell because its hind legs and lower half were lower than its upper body. Could have been crouching or sitting though. Upper torso was huge, and I thought I saw stripes on its fur, but my friend said it looked like it was its ribcage exposed. The eyes did reflect from when the high beams exposed it in the trees, and at first, I assumed it was an elk because they're everywhere in this area. But it was extremely huge, easily over 15 foot tall but thin. I didn't immediately react to it and kept driving, but when I did see it, the conversation between my friend and I stopped as if we both saw it and trying to process it. After I pulled off to use the restroom roughly a mile away from where I saw that, I couldn't help but to keep looking down the road, making sure that creature wasn't coming after us. It was a feeling I never experienced before, and when I turned around to get back into the car, I couldn't help but notice my friend staring down the road as well, doing the exact same thing I was doing. I asked him if he saw something as well, and he said what he saw was something that looked like the forest spirit in the Studio Ghibli movie Princess Mononoke, but from hell. At this point, my fear was validated, and I jumped into the car and sped off. The feeling we both had was more than a sense of dread, and almost like we were being hunted, or if we were to investigate it at the time, our lives would have been in danger. I never in my life felt this type of fear before, and it was a new experience that I never in my life was to have. I'm glad she made it safe, and we were in the right place at the right time to give her the help she needed. After that situation, I was informed about her life of substance use and struggles, that it's actually gotten worse over the years. Ever since that night, my friend and I dealt with lots of personal things very similar. Our marijuana use increased to cope with major depression, suicidal ideation, death in family, and just overall rough time since that night. I struggle to claim there is some association with what we saw that night, but it's very strange how our lives got increasingly worse since. I tried doing research on Wendigo and even Skinwalker, but I get a lot of stories that's hard to take in as real encounters and would love to learn more on them. Fourth story. I encountered a creature that feeds on memories. I was not born with the ability to see the memory feeders. It's something that came to me when I was 5, after a beating from my maternal grandfather left me close to death. When I woke up in the hospital, I saw one of the creatures for the first time. At first, I thought it was a bird, looking out at me through the air vent. It made jerky movements and twisted its head at impossible angles. Then, it flattened itself as thin as a stingray and seeped out the vent, entering my hospital room, where it flew down and landed on my grandfather's shoulder as he slept. Then it opened its mouth and stuck its long tongue into his ear. I sat there, holding my hospital blanket tight. I would have screamed, except my lips were so swollen I could barely open my mouth. And so I just sat there, shaking, trying not to make a sound. When the police visited my room and asked my grandfather what had happened to me, he told them, "I don't remember." And he was telling the truth. I work in hospice care now, in a large city. We specialize in family work, and many of our clients are in their 40s and 50s. The creatures love to feed here, because the memories are fresh and whole. Over time, I've learned their habits. They prefer the taste of happy memories, weddings, births, birthdays, graduations. There are some clients they just won't touch. The dying men with no families, with hollow eyes, might as well be rotten meat to the memory eaters. I generally don't interfere with the creatures feeding. My clients are generally so close to death that I figure they have a few memories to spare. What's the harm if a Christmas morning gets forgotten? And if I'm being honest, maybe I've been jealous. Because I'm rotten meat. I search and search, and all I find are bad memories. My mom's OD. My grandparents' resentment. My dad visiting dead drunk, shouting into the night. The feeders avoid me like I'm radioactive. I do try to keep the feeders away from visitors. The creatures can hardly contain themselves when children's footsteps come thumping down the hall, eager to see mom or grandma. If I'm not careful, the creatures will descend from the vents and feed on the first time Emma saw snow, or that Friday Samuel skipped school and cuddled with mom on the couch all day. In general, a vacuum is enough to scare them off. So if I see them eyeing a child's ear, I'll head into the room and get busy, even if it interrupts a tender conversation between mother and son. Sometimes, though, the creatures cling to their victims like addicts, and I have to take more drastic action. I've found that I can grab them by the wings and fling them out the window. Once or twice, I've killed them, snapping their necks, but afterward, the stench smell of sulfur was overpowering, and it took weeks of scrubbing my hands before they felt clean. Overall, I would say we'd had an uneasy truce. Until last week. Last week, a teenage girl snuck in after hours. She was basically an angel in human form. Star student, constantly volunteering at the local humane society. Her dad had been a beloved high school teacher until he drew the wrong card and ended up with stage 4 liver cancer. And he didn't even drink. The girl was convinced that it was Dad's last night on Earth and couldn't bear the thought of him dying without her there. So she snuck into the facility. I'm still not sure how. When I found her, she was sleeping in a chair in her dad's room. And perched on her shoulder was the biggest memory eater I'd ever seen. It was big as a condor, wings stretching maybe 4 feet wide. It knelt over the girl with its worm-like tongue pulsing in her ear as memories flowed down its throat. It met my eyes as it drank, and for the first time since my childhood I was afraid of one. This was no little bird I could fling out the window. This one would fight. This one could kill me. I stood there shaking as the creature stared at me with its black eyes, warning me that one more step would mean death. I started to back away. If I left things as they were, no one would ever know. Even the girl might go through her whole life, never realizing what had happened, what she was missing. Something in me couldn't do it. No matter how much I wanted to run, I wouldn't let myself. And so I charged forward, tacking the creature off the girl. It clawed at me with its talons, ripping my arms. They stung with invisible wounds, like I'd been lashed with invisible whips. It bit at me, too, trying to blind me with its beak. When that didn't work, it unleashed its tongue, licking at my face, its saliva burning me like acid. Holding its body off with my left hand, I reached forward with my right, grabbing the creature's tongue. Then I wrapped it around my arm over and over, gritting my teeth as the acid seeped through my skin. As it did, I began to realize I was forgetting. My mother was the first to go. I still had the awareness of her overdose, but the details began to grow fuzzy. Once, I'd remembered the exact angle of her body, some kind of smell that surrounded her, some kind of last words she'd written. Now they were all disappearing down the creature's throat, and as it ate them, it gagged, like it had eaten shit or vomit. The creature tried to pull away, but I kept holding its tongue. The memories all began to disappear. My grandparents were sucked out little by little until all that remained was some vague bullet points, like they were a movie I'd seen in my youth and then forgotten. Then my dad was gone too, and all the bullying through middle school. The dark things I'd thought about in high school too. The years lost and wandering before I finally got my shit together and made it into nursing school. The creature was weak on its feet now, barely able to stand. And finally it fell to the floor, dead and bloated. Finally, as I unleashed its tongue, a wave of tiredness washed over me, and I closed my eyes. I don't see the creatures anymore, but maybe there are things we're not meant to see. Even now, I can feel the shape of them fading from my mind. I guess that's part of why I'm writing this down, in case I forget them entirely. I'm ready to forget. There's a kind of bliss in it. Ever since that night, I walk the halls of the hospice, and I don't feel heavy anymore. I never used to hug the grieving families, but now I do. When that teen girl's father died, I held her close as she wept in my arms, and she kept saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Had she woken up? Had she seen the fight? Or was she thanking me for something else? And in truth, I could barely remember what I'd done. Fifth story. I survived a Wendigo. This isn't the first story. The first one will be posted after this. My apologies. I've been hidden for a while now. You know that feeling of your home being the safest place on earth, as if it was an impenetrable fortress? It's a foreign feeling. Well, as it turns out, it only resides when you feel as if there is a trust between you and nature. And when you have broken that wall with an entity, you've lost the feeling. The happiest feeling of them all, safety. My home was a sanctuary at one point. You could confide in it for days, if you wished. The feeling of comfort would draw people in like a compass towards the north. But it's gone now. It's foreign, as I said. You take it for granted, and when it's gone, it's utterly crippling. You have to hide, you have to run, just to try to find solace in a place that has none. It's in my house. The feeling is gone, and it's in my house. I've been hiding in my cleaning closet for around 2 hours, pretty sure, and I don't know how long else this will last as the thing. The Wendigo is out for my blood, in my own house. I'll elaborate, but I don't have much time. Last week it started with the taunting. The hello S and the J-ack S still bumbling around in my mind as I type. The beast taunted me. Its bravado-packed lungs wanted to tease me and get me to move from sanctuary to catch a kill, and that doesn't make me scared. It just pisses me off. It started with the taunting while I was camping, and when I got fed up, I yelled back at it, and many reverb voices came and yelled right back at me, including my dead elderly neighbor, its early prey. Then it followed me. I screamed at it, I shot at it, and I ran home, as it was the safest place for me. And I wasted all the ammo on the damn kill. I sat there, for whatever feels like forever ago now, in front of my door, blocking it. But the creature is smart, found a way onto my leveraged patio, and glazed in my window. Then came the tapping, the slow, consistent tink-tink-tink on the glass. It was soft, and the monster crouched down to not peer in the window. But the tapping, it was worse. It grew, slowly rising from the soft tink-tink-tink to thuds against the glass, slowly cracking the canvas from the middle out until I heard it. Hello. The glass crumbled. It crawled in within the next second, the shards distinctly crunching under the weight of the thing. By this point I had my back turned, behind a door, so I had no visuals. The only thing guiding me to that thing was the soft smushing of the carpet under its feet, leading directly to the closet I was in. I leaned against the thin door as if it were a shield against a cascade of arrows, clinging my last hope tightly. It made it to the door. I heard it take a deep, long breath in, then out. It leaned in close and sniffed. Repeat a couple more times, and he was on his way. He went over to my room door, which was across the hall. I heard the inhale, a stuttering one this time, since he was sniffing. He took a pause. It felt like he debated for a moment. I opened the closet door a tiny crack to instigate what he had stopped for. He had his head tilted, then took a step back and rammed the door with his antlers. I jumped at the noise alone as he hit the door fairly hard. I looked back to see him rearing himself up to go at it again, and I focused on his antlers. They still looked splintered, as if he took on a tornado and landed headfirst onto his antlers from 100 feet up in the air. It looked as if when he took another ramming to the door, the antlers would crumble on impact, and so when he bowed his head and took a lunge forward and broke through the door, I was surprised. The door had a hole in it now. He had wriggled out of it a second earlier. The door had a hole, and to accompany it, the door bent inwards towards the hall, near the left upper corner, so much that the pole bit holding the hinge parts together, and broke it to the extent that there was an inch of room between the two halves. He wrung 3 of his fingers into the gap of the door hinge, and another 4 into the hole. He bent forward and pulled swift and fast, tearing the door from its hinges and breaking the overlapping frame with it. Preceding this, the beast stuck his head in, towards an angle so his antlers didn't get caught in the hole where the door used to be. I was scared he found a scent trail of my stuff, since he could then find me based off my scent. He went inside the room, and around 30 seconds of him sniffing around, he started rummaging. I thought I heard a low, raspy, "See you here. Yo, you are here." As if he was talking to himself, muttering. I slowly shut the crack of the door I was behind, and as soon as I had fully done so, I heard it. There were 2 thuds, then a smash and crumble of the glass. I looked out of the reimbursed crack I made. He escaped. He smashed my window and escaped. Not only was I scared, now I was scared and pissed off, because now I have this damn thing taunting me like I'm its prey, in which I will not be. I'm going to leave this segment off here. I need to pack. I need to prepare for the inevitable, and I'm going to kill that damned beast. 6th story. My first encounter with ghosts. When I was a kid, I moved to a new house. When I moved in the house, I immediately knew it's something weird in the house. Sometime my house happened something I couldn't explain. Like sometime when I was trying to turn on the light. If I was inside the room, the light usually didn't work. But every time if I left the room to turn on the light in the hallway, it immediately could work again. Or sometime the door of my room slapped so hard to close by itself, and it happened a lot. It scared me and my parents, and the weird part is, it only happened to my room. I was trying to convince myself it was just the wind, but it never seems a wind could be this strong inside the house, and it always happens immediately. I mean, just a second boom, and the wind disappeared and it happened more and more frequently. One day my parents had to leave for some reason, and I was the only person to stay in the house. I stayed in my room, and I got bored, so I started looking around my room. Then I found the Bible, and it was hidden inside the drawer. Maybe it belongs to the last person who was living here. I got interested, so I decided to read it. And when I was reading in my room, suddenly the lights shoot down, but it also happened before. At that moment, I thought it was the power outage. But since I was a kid at that time, I didn't know how to fix it. So I decided to keep reading the Bible by using the flashlight to wait until my parents came home. Because I was really interested in the Bible. So I really focused. Suddenly I heard a sound. I said it's a sound, but I think it didn't come through my ears but came straight to my brain. At first it was very low, but it started getting louder and louder. It was so loud that I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't tell what kind of noise it was, but then I finally realized it was a laugh, a very high-pitched laugh, since I was the only person in the house then where the sound came from. The more I thought about it, the creepier I felt. So I decided to leave the room by acting calmly. Whatever the voice came from, I didn't want to let it notice. I was intensely shivering. I walked to the living room, sat on the sofa, and turned on the TV. I wanted to distract my attention by watching TV. But I was wondering what is the situation in my room now. So I took a glance to my room, and I saw it. There is a guy standing on the bed looking at me. When I said it's the guy, it's not very accurate. More precisely, it's a man-shaped shadow standing there and watching me. I was so scared that I didn't dare to move. My body is stiff. I couldn't take my eyes off him. So we just stared at each other for a long time. And then it jumped down the bed and disappeared in the dark. And when I finally could move, I saw the time, and it was just in the middle of the day. Usually my neighbor's kids like to play outside the house. But they didn't play on that day. When my parents came home, I told all the details about what happened today. But they insisted that it was all my imagination. Later, I learned that the demons showed up and interfered with the belief of the Christians. I couldn't help but to think that maybe on that day what I saw was not the ghost, rather the demon wanted to disturb me. 7th story. Wendigo. My best friend is a Wendigo. Madison and I were lounging in the grass of the backyard enjoying the last of the late autumn sun. She was busy playing with her toys, throwing them about as if she were sprinkling snowflakes. I, on the hand, was comfortable in my mom's lounge chair, trying to finish this book I kept putting off. It's Wendigo, not Wendigo. A dingo is a dog in Australia. I didn't take my eyes off the page. Jason ran for the knife but tripped over his own feet, falling desperately onto the sand. But he is one. Madison's whiny 7-year-old voice drew my gaze. She was a pretty child with chestnut hair. Big cheeks and even bigger eyes made her popular amongst her peers and their mothers. I don't know where she got those genes from. I was her big sister, and I was never so cute. There was always something awkward about my face. Maybe it was the thin nose or the puckered eyes. I kept to myself mostly, choosing to live in fiction rather than reality. Where did you hear that word? I asked, scanning the page one more time. Jason's taut muscles pushed against the creature, locked in a struggle he may never escape from. Madison shrugged. I think you said it one time. About a book you were reading. I laughed. Oh yeah, that terrible fake Native American romance book. God, what was it called? I recounted the piles of books that littered my room. The Wendigo's Yearning, I said finally. What a trashy book. What is a Wendigo? Madison rose from the ground, brushing off her dress. She came over to me and put her little hand on my arm. I quickly finished my paragraph before setting the book down. It was all over. Jason would never breathe in the summer air again. Well, a Wendigo is a bad spirit, like a monster. It wants to eat people. Madison frowned. So it's not nice? I raised my eyebrows. No, Madison. It is not nice. It looks like a skeleton almost, really thin and always hungry. It eats humans because it wants to be full. But it can never be full. So it just keeps eating and eating. Madison took her hand off my arm and tapped it against her head. Does it like to play? You're being weird. I picked my book up again. The creature descended upon Jason's hard body, ripping the flesh away like newspaper. Well, I think you're wrong. Wendigos don't eat people. He didn't eat me. Jason's blood tasted sweet as the creature licked clean his insides. I rolled my eyes. You don't know a Wendigo. And your best friend is a little boy, not a monster. He used to be a little boy, she replied, turning away from me and walking towards the woods that lay beyond our yard. Madison, come back. The creature slurped down Jason's intestines. She didn't listen to me. I sighed. I'll tell Mom you went in the woods. As the creature gnawed on the final bone, it began to grow taller. Madison ignored me. When she reached the tree line, I groaned and got up. The creature would only become bigger as it ate. Madison, you're going to be in big trouble. I bet Mom will make you go to bed without dinner. She turned around, now shouldered by trees. I want you to meet him. Then you'll see. She held her hand out to side and grabbed a hold of the nearest tree branch. I was going to respond when I realized that the branch was also holding on to her. As I neared them, it was clear that this was no tree at all. It was a tall creature, extremely thin and bony, matching the color of the foliage. Its face was turned down, but I could see saliva-dripping teeth. Madison just smiled. This is my Wendigo. I knew I should have ran to her, but instead I tore back towards the house. I could hear large steps behind me, but I didn't stop. I opened and slammed the door, locking it. My breath was heavy. I looked out the window and saw Madison still holding its hand as they moved closer and closer. My mom entered the room. What are you doing? She asked sweetly. It's Madison. She is with I don't know, a monster. My mom peered out the window. She smiled and winked at me. That's just her Wendigo. Don't worry, honey, he's harmless. She turned to go back to whatever she was doing, and I gasped in horror. The entire backside of her torso had been hollowed out, licked clean. Yet she still walked away, leaving a small mucus trail as it dripped from her exposed flesh. Madison was now knocking on the door, giggling. Let us in, sis. My Wendigo is hungry. 8th story. My encounter with the goatman. During 1999, I worked briefly as a vacuum cleaner salesman. Yes, the job was as terrible as it sounds, which required very late nights as I was often at customers' homes till around 9 p.m. Before having to go back to the head office to check out, then drive back home, often not arriving home until 12 to 1 a.m. I was working late this one particular night and was on the home stretch, around 10 minutes from home, when my old crappy cheap Ford Fiesta started to overheat. I knew the car wouldn't make it home and had no choice other than to pull into a lay-by on top of the big, dark, deserted mountain next to my town. My hometown is literally the last town before there are just mountain and forest for countless miles. As I pulled into the mountain parking area with steam pouring my engine, this is 100% true by the way, a white humanoid figure, obviously surprised that a car was pulling into a deserted parking space in the middle of the night, ran directly front of my headlights as it sprinted from the edge of the clear side of the parking area and into the forest on the other side. It had no clothes, features, genitals, and hair, etc. Just a white figure with 2 arms and 2 legs that appeared almost luminous and reflective in my lights. To say I shit myself is a bit of an understatement. My eyes popped out of my sockets when it ran in front of me. But then I realized that I was stuck in a dead car in a deserted mountain lay-by in the middle of the night with no mobile phone signal, as this was back in the days when mobile phones were just starting to become popular. But large chunks of the country were missing from network coverage. I had no choice but to sit there for around an hour until my car cooled down, as it gave up the ghost pretty much the second I pulled in. So I sat in my car, alone, staring directly into the forest where the thing I saw had run. No weapon, no way to contact, any way to let them know where I was, and no passing traffic to possibly flag down. During my wait in the car, I obviously started to wonder what I had seen. I knew for a fact that I had actually seen something, and it was not a trick of the light. That much was clear. I discounted sheep, horses, foxes, or any other animal that populated the Welsh mountains, as I was certain it a 2-legged humanoid creature shape with roughly human head, body, arms, and legs proportions. The obvious answer would have been that it was some very strange man who for some reason was wearing a white entire body stocking. Think Charlie's Greenman in It's Always Sunny. But since we were miles away from the nearest home, and I was the only car around, it's highly unlikely that someone would have spent hours walking through thick forest just to hang out at a parking area in the middle of a forest wearing a unitard. Since I could rule out possible animals or humans, I had to consider the alternative, which isn't a nice thing to think about when you were stuck in a broken-down car with this creature very possibly still outside. I didn't think it was aliens as it was too tall compared to the classic look, while any type of apparition or ghost doesn't tend to run away from people when surprised. I'm not sure if there is some kind of Welsh version of a Wendigo, but if I had to categorize the encounter, this would be my number one choice. There was always talk of satanic rituals and witches practicing in the forest when I was a kid, and also of illegal bare-knuckle fights where people had been killed and buried there to cover up the crime. But I didn't think much of it at the time and always wrote it off to superstition and rumor. But now I'm not so sure. Eventually my car cooled down enough for me to limp back home. No one really believed me when I told them what I saw and are adamant that it was a sheep. But to this day, I will swear that the creature I encountered was something different. I've been in the forest many times since camping, biking, and hiking, and have never seen anything like that again. But whenever I go there, I am always aware of the possible presence of the goatman. Ninth story. Very up-close skinwalker encounter. I don't really know how to start this. I was watching a YouTube video and made me think I should probably post my experience. This happened my sophomore or junior year of high school, so almost 3 years ago. I live in rural western North Carolina, and I'm the first stop for the bus route, but my bus stop is probably a quarter mile away from my house, as our neighborhood is on a hill with a big private drive that leads up to the houses, and every morning say around 6:50, I would walk out of my driveway and down to the bus stop and wait. It's pitch black down there, by the way, only my phone flashlight to guide me. And every day I would stand and wait, most of the time listening to music or just looking at my phone. It always felt eerie being in the dark alone like that, but I just have always felt uncomfortable in the dark. But one morning I was walking down the hill as I did. It's a steep, long hill, by the way, and I only made it about a quarter of the way down, and I heard a scraping noise almost. It's hard to describe the best way. I know how explain it as nails on sheet metal originally. I didn't think much of it and just slowed down a little. And then it happened again. All of this happens within 30 seconds, mind you. And by my instinct, I guess I just stopped in my tracks. My heart started pounding from the noise, making nervous, and I began to hear loud rustling at the tree line on my left side before something pale white, human-shaped, and maybe deer-sized ran out of the wood line into the small yard next to me. I turned and ran so fast I didn't get to look long as it triggered my fight or flight response. I ran all the way back up the hill and jumped over every step on my porch and straight into my house, truly fearing for my life and hyperventilating. Mind you, I'm a large guy, about 5 feet 11 inches, 250 pounds. I don't get spooked easy, but I remember running and letting out a reflexive wail of fear. It's all I could do as I ran, and to this day, I never walk in my neighborhood in the dark. I was scared so bad I found another way to get to school besides the bus, and shortly after got my license. I just want to hear what y'all think. I've only told my mom and my friends, and I'm more than willing to post pictures of where it happened as I still live here. 10th story. I can see people's auras, and it's a curse. Yes, I can see people's auras. And I hate saying it so bluntly. It makes me sound like some hack psychic who fakes the ability as a means of exploitation and a paycheck. I've never made money from my ability. I've never taken advantage of it. And, until now, I've never spoken of it to anybody. But I really do see them, and I'm starting to view it as more of a curse. I have a reason for typing this out, and I assure you, there isn't a happy ending. For me, it's quite simple. I see a faint light surrounding people, everyone, and in that light, I can see their morality. The brighter and more translucent the light is, the better the person. The darker and opaquer, the worse. Dim and partly translucent are morally ambiguous. To simplify things, those are the three ways I describe them. Dark equals evil. Bright equals good. Dim equals somewhere in between. It's strange. I've always viewed the people with gray/dim auras as arbiters, mediators, the people in between, who aren't one or the other, and will always have difficult decisions to make. I was a child when I first became aware of my gift. It didn't take long to figure out that the brighter auras were kinder to me and selfless. While both of my parents are good people, my father's aura was quite a bit brighter than my mother's. As a result, he was always far more patient and understanding with me. It was clear to see that my teachers and fellow students with brighter auras were usually friendlier and more compassionate. The dark auras were the stereotypical fighters, lunch money stealers, and bullies. I would say I was around 8 years old when I fully figured out that I have a gift that most people don't have, that possibly nobody else has. I've read some of the New Age websites and alternative medicine articles that give their take on aura reading. While I believe that the vast majority of it is bullshit, I expect there must be at least some other people out there with my ability. So I don't want to completely dismiss those people as an outright hoax. It's just that for me, it doesn't work anything like the way those websites describe. I visited numerous aura readers and psychics. Most of them have dim or dark auras themselves, and I'm certain they don't really hold this power. I'm not saying all psychics are terrible people. I visited a few who had very bright auras. They were unable to convince me that they really have psychic powers, but they at the very least use their deception to try and help people. You need to understand. I'm going to end this entry by sharing a terrifying event that is happening to me. But before I get to that, I think there are a few more things I need to explain. I imagine many of you are curious as to what type of aura is the most common. I'm happy to tell you that the majority of people are somewhere between dim and bright. I see very few dark auras. This isn't scientific, and I haven't traveled the world plotting out charts and graphs, but I'd estimate around 60% of people are brightish, around 25% dimish, leaving just around 15% darkish. Again, these are just estimates. What's the precise difference between, say, bright and dim? I have no idea, but rest assured, there is far more bright in the world than dark. The next thing I'd like to discuss is children. I can see a person's aura right from birth, and I've never encountered an aura changing as someone ages. I'm not sure what this means for the whole nature versus nurture debate. And I'm not saying that everyone with a dark aura always behaves terribly, or vice versa. A person with a bright aura might be born in horrible conditions, acquire a drug problem, and then resort to thievery to feed their addiction. I think the difference is this. A bright aura thief with a horrible upbringing may rob someone, but they would never intentionally hurt someone in the process. A dark aura thief would kill someone if they could get away with it without even a second thought. Another interesting note. I find the ratio between bright/dim/dark to be similar across pretty much all human activities. Whether I'm at a church or a death metal concert, it always seems to be around that same 60%-25%-15% ratio. I once visited a federal prison and was shocked to see that at least half of the prisoners had bright auras. I had to be at the prison in person to see this because I can't see auras on photographs, television shows, movies, or even in mirrors. I can only see auras in the real world. Another strange thing. I can't even see my own aura. I assume and hope I would be on the brighter spectrum, but I can't see it. The brightest person I ever saw worked as a social worker. She shone so bright that it was difficult for me to even look at her. Based on the way people acted in her presence, I think that almost everyone around her could sense her brightness in a subconscious way. Everyone loved her. She had donated a kidney to someone she barely even knew. She had a special needs adopted child. Most of the money she earned was donated to various charities. And that's only the little that I knew of her. This woman shined so brightly that she scared me. It was scary that someone could be so good. but it wasn't nearly as scary as the darkest person I ever saw. I was 20 years old at the time, leaving a club downtown at 2 a.m. A man quietly walked down the street. I didn't see him at first, but I noticed the light dimming around me. This man was so dark that he partly absorbed the light around him. I looked at him long and hard. He looked desperate, cruel, and callous. When he looked up and locked eyes with me, it made me fall back. He smirked, as though he knew what I could see. I saw his face up close. I would never forget it, and I recognized it when I saw his mugshot a few weeks later in the newspaper. He had murdered his ex-wife and 2 children in cold blood. I think I need to get to it now. The reason why I'm writing this out. I fell in love a year ago. She didn't shine anywhere near as bright as what I've seen before, but she most assuredly wasn't dark or even dim. She was beautiful. Her sense of humor, her wit, her everything. She was my dream woman, and I've never told her anything at all about the auras I see. I could go into far more about her, but this isn't a love story. What's important is this. We fell in love. She got pregnant. We got married. We were happy. We were so happy. I remember hearing the buzz of my phone 2 mornings ago. I remember my excitement when I saw it's happening. Come to the hospital. I remember my frustration when I got stuck in traffic. I remember how long it took to find a parking spot. I remember shouting at a nurse, "What room is my Wi-Fi in?" I remember bursting through a door and seeing the smile on my wife's face. I remember seeing the doctor, his light shining so bright, as he told me, "Congratulations, it's a boy." The doctor held him up to me, and all the light in the room dissipated. "No, this can't be." I remember saying. The doctor put him in my arms. The darkness around my son was so absolute that I could barely even see him. He was a void. He was so dark that the world barely even existed around him. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I started weeping. I think my wife and the doctor thought they were tears of joy, but they weren't. Lord knows they weren't. I think back to the dark outline around that man that murdered his family. It was up to that point the darkest I'd ever seen. But the darkness around my son was 100 times worse. 1,000 times worse. And what could possibly be 1,000 times worse than murdering your entire family? It's been 2 days. We're home now. My son's darkness is so extreme that it dims the hallway leading to his room. My wife knows something is wrong. I think she suspects I'm having regrets about having children at all. If only she knew. What do I do? He's my son. Just 20 minutes ago, I stood above him, holding a pillow over his face. But I couldn't do it. Not yet anyway. A man who could murder his 2-day-old baby boy. What color would his aura be? And here's the thought that keeps going through my mind as I sit here alone. The fathers of our worst. The Adolf Hitlers. Joseph Stalins. Timothy McVeighs. If their fathers knew what they would become, would they murder them in the cradle? Would they have the strength to hold down the pillow as long as it takes? I can see the door of my son's room from my office. The hallway seems to be growing darker. I look down at my hands as I type this. Maybe I'm going crazy, but there seems to be an aura around my hands and arms now. It's gray. It's dim. Maybe it's always been dim. I'm looking down at the pillow beside me. The grayish dim outline around my hands more apparent than ever. Maybe it's time. Maybe this is why I have this gift. It all comes down to right now. Maybe it's time. I think it's time. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.